Hi folks, in this video, I'm going to show you a concept called a zero net check. A zero net check is something you can use in either QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop. In this specific video, I'm going to do the entire example in QuickBooks Desktop because I have a template that I use to import the information, which I'll cover towards the end of the video. Now, a zero net check is utilized to create a transaction that can affect your customers, jobs, your projects, or your classes, for example, without affecting the bottom line of your financials, without affecting your banks or your cash. A zero net check is used to allocate or redistribute amounts or balances from accounts, from items, from customers, from classes. Again, that may not make a lot of sense until we do the actual example. So let's jump right to it. I'm in QuickBooks Desktop now. I'm going to run a profit and loss report. So I'm going to go to Company Financial, Profit and Loss, and just run a regular Profit and Loss Standard. I'm going to run the Profit and Loss Standard for the entire year. So I'm going to pick here this fiscal year. Now I see here, I'm going to collapse the rows. I see here I got revenue, I got job materials, I got a whole bunch of expenses, including payroll expense. If I change this report to be reported at the customer level, so profit and loss by customer or by job, simply by clicking on total only and then going down and selecting customer job. Now I get to see my revenue and expenses by job. But notice that in this particular QuickBooks file, we do have our revenue by job, job 1001, and our job materials by job, job 1001, giving me a profit per job, but I don't see any other expenses beyond job materials. I'm going to change this from customer job back to total only, just so we can see the mechanics of this. And notice that yes, my revenue and my job materials are being reported by the job, but our payroll, for example, which is something that we usually tend to allocate to jobs, is not being allocated to the job at all. And the reason for that is, I'm going to go ahead and double click on the payroll expense and open up one of these expenses, is because we are paying a lump sum of payroll, maybe to a third-party payroll company like ADP or Paychecks or whatever, and we don't have any job information, any class information. We don't have any details on how those payrolls should be distributed by job because we're using a third-party payroll company and we're paying a single lump sum. So the way to solve this is by creating a zero net check. Now I'm going to open up the spreadsheet, which happens to be the spreadsheet where I have my core labor data per job. Typically, if you happen to have a spreadsheet with information like this, you will have information like the date that the employee worked, the employee name, the hours, their rate. You could use their actual real rate, or you can use a fully burdened rate that contains taxes and that sort of thing. That's going to be up to you and what you use, and the job information. As long as I got that information, the employee name, the hours, the rate, and the job information, I could bring in a zero net check to redistribute that entire payroll cost into these different jobs. So for example, I created this zero net check of, it's not a real check though, but in QuickBooks it's a check, but it's not what would be a real check in the real world, that nets out to zero. So the net amount of the check is zero, hence the concept of zero net check. I created a bank account called a clearing account just so I don't confuse my real checks that are coming out of my real bank account and these zero net checks. So I created a separate clearing account just to create the zero net checks. Here on the payee information, I put the actual employee's name. So whether you have him as a vendor or an employee, it doesn't matter how you have it. You just have to have it either as a vendor or an employee for this to work. So I'm going to put my employee's name there. And then I'm going to break down here in the items tab, not the expenses tab, the items tab. I'm going to break out each individual day that they worked. And I'm going to put their quantity and the cost. So let me open up the spreadsheet here. I'm going to put it here to the right-hand side and QuickBooks on the left-hand side so you kind of follow along. And then we have this employee, Mary Stevens, okay, who worked presumably, let's say that week. And I'm going to come down here and see this is all the information that I have on my spreadsheet. So Mary Stevens worked all these days, all these hours, and this is her rate that we're using. And these are all the jobs that she worked in. So in order to create this zero net check and reallocate the labor burden, I went ahead and created an item called labor. And I'm going to show you real quick how I did that. So I created an item in the item list, which is a service item. And I make sure that the cost account, the expense account, is going into an account that's called direct labor or payroll. It really doesn't matter, but you want to use an account that's probably a cost of goods sold account, just so it looks a lot cleaner when I look at the P&L by customer. And I have to make sure I click this little checkbox that says this service is used in assemblies or performed by a subcontractor or partner. Because if I don't click on that checkbox, I only have the opportunity to put my sales account, and it will really sort of screw things up. So you want to make sure I click on this checkbox and my expense account is direct labor. Now my income account, I'm going to use a sales account, but if I'm not going to use this item in an invoice or a sales receipt in a sales context, it really doesn't matter what I put in there. The focus is what is going to go into the expense account. The cost doesn't matter, the description doesn't matter, because that's going to be all different and it will vary by employee. So I'm going to click cancel and get out of that and close that. So that's how the item was created. Now you will notice that for each of the day that Mary worked, for example, on 6/1, she worked for 10 hours. For customer A, job 1001, I put it in here. I'm using the date in the description just because there's no field to put an actual date, because the only date I can put, the only real date, is going to be the check date. And this is not a real check. This is just going to match when the payroll run was done. So if that week was paid on 6/30, I'm going to make my zero net check on 6/30. So I post on the books on that day. So basically the actual day that they worked in this particular case would just go into the description. That would be the only purpose of putting the date in there. So for each of the days that they worked, I use the same line item, labor. I put the quantity, I put the rate, and I'm going to just collapse the one on the right here so we get a little bit more real estate. And then you see that the job is assigned. Every one of the jobs is assigned to each of those lines, including the times that she didn't work in any jobs. So I just put it onto a customer called admin. And I just did that to sort of clean things up, make it just not have it cleared in there, just not have nothing. I just want to put it into admin so we can do other things with the admin later. I'm gonna expand the right hand side here, and you can see that there is an instance which you worked 2 hours in the job called admin, which basically means no job. So that's what we did. I went ahead and I put all that information in there. And then at the very end, in order to make this check zero, I have to make a line item that basically annuls or zeroes out all the other individual expense items. So I did that last line at the end, which I'm just going to delete here for now, just to show you. And I have right now only the actual cost components, which totals to 942.08. If I were to click save, this check amount changes to 942.08, and now it's going to mess up my balance sheet. This check needs to be netting to zero, otherwise it just wouldn't work. So in order to make this net to zero, I have to enter one more line at the very end that has a negative amount of 942.08. So I do negative 942.08. And that last line there doesn't have to have any customer job, any date description, any quantity or anything like that. As long as the total amount, it negates all the cost components, it zeroes out the check, and it makes it a zero net check. So I'm going to click on save on that, and I'm going to show you the other ones I created. So I have this one for Robert Martinez, and I'm also going to show you my spreadsheet, okay, which is here on the right hand side, and you see that this is all the information that now was entered in that zero net check. Now I actually imported this into QuickBooks because I have a very specific template I created that allows me to take information from a spreadsheet like this and convert it into an IIF file, which allows me to import this into QuickBooks. So I don't have to sit there and type every one of these things by hand. It does help when you have a lot of these, a lot of lines to enter. It helps you use a template but for some small business owners, maybe they're doing 2 or 3 employees per week or per every 2 weeks or per whatever the payroll period is. And it just makes more sense to enter manually than to like buy a template, which is what I have. And I will offer you, and I'll talk about the template again. At the end of the video, I'll explain the template. I'm just explaining the concept of the zero net check so you can do it on your own while you are watching and you know how to do this, at least manually, how you would enter that. I'm going to see if there's another check in here. I think I did 3 of them. I did one for Hector Garcia here, which was basically just one entry for 40 hours and $100 going into admin, and also zeroing out that entry as well. So now that you know how to enter the zero net checks, the logic behind it, why you enter the expenses, then the zero at the end, let's take a look at the benefit. What do we get out of doing the zero net check? So I have these zero net checks I created. Let me go back to my profit and loss. Notice that in my profit and loss report, there's a new line here called direct labor, and it's 0. So that means everything I did not affect my net income at the end. It stayed the same. If I double click on that 0, I can see there's a whole bunch of transactions in here. You can see every single line item from every transaction in here. I can take this report and group it by vendor because I have the employee set up by vendors. And you can see how these are now grouped by vendor. Each of the checks I created, the vendor is the employee in this case, or I can group it by customer so I can see where these labor units are being sent at the job level. So it's really, really neat how this could work. If you do group it by customer, what you might want to do is click on customize report and click on source name, just so we can see the employee name or the vendor name in here as well. So you get to see that for customer job 1001, we had 2 time entries, one from the employee Robert, one from the employer Mary, and here's the total burden cost. I can also expand this. Click on customize report, enable the quantity field, enable the, I believe it's rate or price. They change the name of these things all the time, sales price. Click on OK, and then I can see the breakdown of how many hours and what labor burden was entered for that customer job, for that employee, using that zero net check. So you get to see all sorts of details, which is great and wonderful. Let me close that out. Now, going back to the profit and loss, let's do now profit and loss by customer job. So I'm going to click on show columns in the top, switch it from total only to customer job. And now I can see that I have job 1001, I got my revenue, and then I have labor component on top of materials component. And if you see, you kind of follow along that direct labor line, you see labors allocated across all the jobs. It's a beautiful thing. That's what we wanted. We wanted to go from that spreadsheet into some sort of accounting adjustment that allows me to see my profit and loss by job. But if I hide the jobs and I just click on total only, it doesn't affect my bottom line, because here in my payroll expense, I'm going to double click on payroll expense. It's my original payroll transaction that was already there that has been untouched. This is the actual lump sum of money that went to pay the payroll company that has not been touched. I didn't have to touch that check. That stayed by itself. The zero net check did everything through that account called direct labor, which I tied to that labor item, which is why I purposely did that, so I can see the 2 things separately. So that gives you a general idea how that stuff gets allocated. I'm going to look at more reports just so we can just see all the different outputs we can get out of allocating labor for this in this particular example. So I'm going to go into jobs, time, and mileage, and I'm going to run let's do a job profitability summary. So now we can see we have our actual costs in one column. We have our revenue in the other column. If I click on any of these actual costs, double click on that, you're going to see a combination of direct labor driven by that zero net check. I'll double click on it so you can see it. It's driven by the same zero net check, and maybe the actual job materials that were spent in other transactions that were correctly allocated to the job, which has nothing to do with the labor that we just did. But you get to see how both of those things are showing in there. So you get to see the full flavor and the detail of the job costing without having to affect your net income or your bank account or anything like that. That's the beauty of the zero net check. I'll do one more report for you just so you can kind of see how cool this is. I'm going to go reports, custom reports, and summary. These are custom summary report. And then what I'm going to do here, let's do this fiscal year. And then under columns, I'm going to put, let's do income statement. And then under rows, I'm going to put customer. And then I'm going to go here into filters. And then instead of using all income and expense account, I'm going to do only cost of sales account. Just so you can kind of see what this will do. And then click on OK. And then I kind of get in the rows, I get all of my customers and my jobs. And then I see my direct labor column and my job materials column. All these cost of goods sold and net, that we probably can ignore those. But these two, where we can see our labor and materials broken down by job, it's just a really, really powerful report. And these are the type of things that you get by allocating labor via a zero net check. Now, that being said, that is not the only thing you can do with a zero net check. Allocating labor is just one example. I'm going to show you a different example just so you can see the dynamics of how this works. Instead of doing a profit and loss by customer, I'm going to do a profit and loss now by class. And as you notice in this particular financial report, I've actually have my job materials allocated by class correctly. So you see my commercial class and my residential class, and you see my income allocated correctly. That means that on every invoice, I have the class correctly entered, which is great. And then I have my job materials allocated per class because on every one of my expenses or my bills, I did enter the class in there. So stuff is going directly into the class. So the report looks great for those transactions. However, I may have other categories like these current truck expense, materials, office supplies, payroll expense, etc., that are sort of left out because I didn't select a class for them. And then maybe what I want to do is I want to break out those expenses, break them down by classes. Maybe I want to split them 50-50 so I can see my profit and loss per class. Now you can do that with a journal entry, that's fine. Or you can do that with a zero net check, and I think that's really the value of doing a zero net check. So I'm going to show you how we do that with a zero net check just so you can kind of see how that will work. I'm going to split this up. There's going to be a little bit of a different dynamic than with a labor, because with labor, I like to use items. For something like this, I wouldn't use items. I would actually use the expenses tab. So let me show you how I would do this. So we'll put this into the clearing account, and then we will break this down. So let's say we're going to do car and truck expense as one category. The other one is office supplies. The third one here is payroll expense. So I'm just going to use the parent accounts. Then we're going to see rent, and then we're going to see utility. Okay, so it's just these here. So then I'm going to come in here and just take half of those amounts. So I'm going to come here and put 6558.50 divided by 2. Then I'm going to do 1158.30 divided by 2. Then I'm going to do 456.50. Again, I'm taking each one of these and I'm splitting it 50-50. If I was doing 60-40 or something like that, instead of dividing by 2, I would multiply times the percentage. So we'll do that, and then we'll do rent, which was, sorry, I missed one here, which is miscellaneous materials. So let me insert a line here, put miscellaneous materials, and that's what I really wanted to do, is put that over here and this over here. So yes, I had put the wrong dollar amounts. And we have payroll, 7848.74 divided by 2. Then we have rent, 15,560 divided by 2. And then we have utilities, 4225.25 divided by 2. And there we go. So that's going to be sort of the first split. And all these things are going to go into, let's say, the commercial class. So I'll just kind of copy and paste that in there as I go down. Okay. And then the second one is going to be sort of the second set of these. So I'm just going to do it again. Again, I'll show you afterwards how you can use my template, the template that I have to quickly do this if you happen to do all this work in Excel first. In this case, I don't have this in Excel. I have it in QuickBooks, and I'm using the profit and loss as a reference, but you could export this into Excel, do your percentages, and then use a template, import this back in. But I'm showing you how to do this without the need of a template. So you would do something like this. Since it's 50-50, I'm just going to copy the numbers. And then the last one, rent and utilities. So you can see the pattern here of how we're doing this. Again, I know this is kind of boring. It's like watching paint dry. I get it. But this is something that you may have to deal with in the real world. So let's do for the second piece of the zero net check. I'm going to go ahead and bring all those classes in there. So I basically have those entries hitting those two. This $35,000 is the total amount of everything. I need that to be zero. So in order for that to be zero, I got to copy all these things again. So we're going to do the whole thing over again as a third line. And I'm just going one by one here. So I'm bringing every single one of the lines. Again, with an import template, it would be infinite times easier. And I'm going to bring that over here. And then I'm going to put the negative amount. So I put negative 6558.50. Similar pattern as before. Only difference is I'm using expense accounts instead of using items. Negative 456.50. Negative 1560. Negative 15560. And then the last one is negative 4. Rent was, whoops. I made the same mistake, put it in the wrong line. So payroll will be negative 7848.74. And the last one is negative 4225.25. Now, because of rounding, I may have this issue with rounding. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these, possibly the one that had the rounding error, which is utilities. And I'm going to round this one up to, I'll round this one down from 6 to 2, and that will give me a net of 0. So once I get a zero net check of 0, I have all the expenses allocated for each of the classes. Again, we're focused on classes here, not customer jobs. And then the very last one will have no classes. Then I want to go ahead and click on Save and Close. And then when I run my profit and loss by class, notice that all my expenses were shifted from unclassified, now hitting each of the classes. Now I can get a true P&L by class. If I were to remove class here and do total only, my P&L looks totally normal, totally unaffected. If I go into my balance sheet, and that's really important too, that's my chart of accounts. Sorry, let me do run the balance sheet, and you'll see that there is no bank account being affected because it's a net of 0. I'm going to run a quick option here, which is to show all the accounts that are active. So I'll show this clearing account at 0, and I can double click on that 0 and see all the transactions that are hitting in there. So we have this, zero net check for the class allocation, and we have all the other zero net checks allocating the labor. So you kind of see both examples in here. And if I go back into my chart of accounts, which is what I was trying to do earlier, I can double click on clearing account and see all the zero net checks, again, that don't affect my accounting, don't affect my balances, don't affect my cash, but I now have total ability to do profit and loss by customer with the labor allocation, or a profit and loss by class with the class allocation trick. So you've seen exactly how a zero net check works. What you've seen is how to do everything manually. Now I'm going to show you how to use a spreadsheet, a specific macro I created that I use to import this stuff much faster. Okay, I'm going to go back to my profit and loss by customer job, and I'm going to delete all these things I did with the zero net checks. And I'm going to show you how I import them. So I'm just going to delete each of these here. And I know after all that work, I get anxious to delete these things. But I'm deleting all the zero net checks. So I no longer have any zero net checks affecting my labor. So I go back into my profit and loss by job, and there are no labor expenses allocated to any job. So I'm going to minimize QuickBooks here for a second. I'm going to go back into my trusty spreadsheet, and I'm making the assumption that this is what I have. I have a spreadsheet that contains this information here. Now, this is my template that I created. It's a macro. And what it does is it allows me to take information that's in this type of format and convert it into an importable file that QuickBooks can read as a transaction. So I don't have to sit there and enter all this stuff by hand, because I already have most of this stuff in a spreadsheet. There should be a way to directly inject that into QuickBooks, and using my template is how we're going to do it. So I'm going to put them side to side. So the one on the left side is the original spreadsheet I got from my payroll company, or however I'm keeping control of this. And then on my right hand side is going to be my IIF macro template that I'm going to use to import this into QuickBooks. So the way my particular template works is, first column is bank account. That needs to match, I'm going to go back into QuickBooks here. It needs to match the name of this clearing account that's here, because I got to tell QuickBooks that that's where I want to post the check. So I'm just going to copy that so I get verbatim exactly what's supposed to be in there. So I'll go back in here, and then there I'm going to put clearing account. So that's the information that should be here. Second one, it should be the check number. Even though these are not real checks, I need to group these by check number, so my template knows that all these belong in one same check. If I use different check numbers, it creates different checks, and it just creates a big mess. What you want is to have one big check for the entire allocation. So let's just say we're going to call this check number 1 for now. I'm going to go open my other spreadsheet here on the left hand side, and I'm going to start with copy and pasting some of the information that's in here. So let's start with the employee names. I'm going to come down here and copy all the employee names and just bring that in and paste it here where it says payee. So I'm going to paste that in there, and then there's all my employee names. So this check number 1, should be the same for the same employee. And then once I switch over to Carlos Smith here, it should be check number 2. And then that should be all the same employee. And then Mary Stevens is check number 3. That should be all the same employee. And then Hector Garcia should be check number 4. Now, this is only necessary if you want to break them down by vendor or by employee. If you want to just ignore this and just create one generic payee called payroll, and then use the employee name in the memo instead of in the check name, then you can do an entire, the entire thing as a check. And I'm going to show you that as well. I'm going to do both types so you can see both and you can decide which way will work. But in this particular case, I want to import 4 different checks. That's how I want to do it. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to bring down bank clearing account, and I'll get everything that I need. Now, check date would be the date of the check that it will be posted into QuickBooks. Let's say we're going to pick the last day of the payroll or the day that the paycheck was paid. And I'm just going to copy and paste that throughout. And I'm going to use the exact same check date. So the check date and the check number should always match. That way QuickBooks knows that all these are one transaction. That the template knows these are one transaction. And all these are another transaction. And these are another transaction, etc., etc. So right here where it says item, I'm just going to put labor. Now, where did I get that information from? Well, I'm going to look into my item list, and whichever item I created for doing this allocation, I need to make sure the item name matches exactly. So that's where I got the information from. That's the labor item that I'm using. You could use multiple or different labor items by employee if you want to, by type of employee, that sort of thing. You can do that. For dates, as I mentioned earlier, there's no place to put like paycheck date or something like that. So I'm going to put in the date, I'm going to put it in the memo. So I'm going to bring this here into the memo, and that's where I want to bring this information in. Then we got on the spreadsheet, we also got quantity and rate. So I'm just going to bring all that stuff over, copy and paste that into my spreadsheet. Notice that there's class. So I'm just going to put here residential for the first half of them, and then I'll put commercial for the other half. And this is just so you can see how the classes get brought into as well. Then we got the customer job, which I have on this other spreadsheet. And I'm just going to copy and paste that. This is the place where most of my clients tend to have issues because the full customer name in QuickBooks is called, in this case, customer A : job space 001. That tends to be an issue because sometimes your job name that you have in some other system might skip customer A and it might just say job 1 or something like that. Or it might not even have the word job and it just says 1001. That's not going to work. The job name needs to be exactly the way QuickBooks spells it out. If you're not sure how QuickBooks spells out the full customer name, you go back into QuickBooks here and you go into reports. You go into, I believe is sales. No, it's in lists. And then you're going to go into customer contact list or customer phone list. And you're going to see a column that says customer that has the full spelling of the name and the job name. So you could export this into Excel and then maybe try to clean it up to make sure it matches QuickBooks exactly, because I'm telling you right off the bat, it's not going to work if you put something random in there that's not the actual job name the way QuickBooks reads it. So again, I'm making the assumption that all the customer names are going to be exact. And same goes for payee name, right? The vendor name or the employee name needs to match 100%. The account needs to match 100%. The class, etc. Everything needs to match, otherwise you'll get an error. So once you have everything loaded into the spreadsheet like this, and it looks exactly like this, and the check numbers are sorted by check number, and the check number and the date they need to match, and the payee, and you make sure everything is correct, you're going to click here where it says Process IIF File. Once you click Process IIF File, you click Yes, that you want to proceed, and it'll ask you where in your computer you want to save this IIF file. I'm going to call this check import 060621 or something like that. And I'm going to save it. So that's going to save an IIF file into my computer. What's an IIF file? Great question. I'm going to show you exactly what that is. I'm going to get that information from my desktop. So there's the file that I just saved. And I'm going to click and drag that into Excel just so I can open it and I can see what it looks like. And this is what an IIF file looks like. Now, I'm actually going to save this file and I'm going to put it in the description. I'm going to put a link so you can download it. And you could, if you want to, go in here and change the customer names, change the classes, do all these things manually in here. The problem is this is going to take you forever if you do it on your own, but you will have the IIF file so you don't have to buy the template from me. This macro template that actually creates these things automatically for you, the one that I see here, this is the one that I sell. I put a link in the description if you want to buy this particular template from me so you can sort of copy and paste and do it the way I'm doing it. So anyway, let's go through the import so we can see what that looks like. I'm going to go back into QuickBooks. Again, I'm looking at the profit and loss by customer job, and there is no direct labor information in here. Once I import IIF file, we're now going to, or we're hoping to see a line that says direct labor and has all the expenses allocated the way I showed you earlier. So let's take a look into that. Let's go into File, Utilities, Import IIF File. We'll click OK. Then we're going to click on Import IIF. We're going to find the IIF file in my computer. Click on Open. So we're going to wait until the transactions get processed. Depending on how many, it might take a few minutes, sometimes just seconds. Perfect. So now that is done, and now I'm going to do it again, run my profit and loss by job, by customer. And now I'm going to notice that there is a direct labor line now allocating all the costs directly into it. I'm going to click on any of these so we can see them. And then we see that these check was created for me. Let's take a look at another one. Okay, and there we go. It's the exact same thing that we did before. We have the labor item, the description with the date, the quantity, the cost, the class, the customer job. All of this stuff was put in there. So everything was imported. Now in the spreadsheet, you have the ability to check billable and uncheck billable. if you want the information to come in as billable. So you have the option to do that. In here, if you put billable, you just have to put no all throughout, and then it will export as non-billable. So you get to choose if you want to make it billable or not. If you don't know what that means, you might want to check other tutorials to understand what billable means, but you got the choice to import it as billable or not billable. So that's pretty much how this spreadsheet will function. My spreadsheet, the one that I created, it's only for items, okay? The one for to do with expenses, that might not be available yet, but I'm eventually going to release that and include it in the bundle if you go buy it. But you want to click on the link in the description if you want to buy the template from me. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the IAF file, let me just open it here again, that I just did on the screen. This file, I'm going to give you access to. I'll put a link for this and you can use it as a sample. Now, let's go a little bit deeper into how this works, because this wasn't a complete import per se. If I go back into QuickBooks and I look at these still have a dollar amount at the end. These are not truly zero net checks. In order for these to be zero net checks, I need an extra line in here, right? That would negate that or cancel that. So I'm doing this manually. So this part I'm doing manually. I'm typing it in there and then I'm making it a zero net check. So if you forget to add that negative line in the spreadsheet during the import, then you can do it manually. However, I'm going to show you how to do it in the spreadsheet. So let me delete that check over here. I'll delete this check over here. Do we have any more? And I'll delete this check over here. So I think, is there another one? No. Okay, so I think we're good to go. If I run my P&L by customer, there's no more direct labor. I'm going to go back into my magical spreadsheet and I'm going to insert a line on each one of these. So I'm going to insert one here, and then I'll insert one in here, and I'll insert one in here. That is a manual process because your natural spreadsheets are not going to have that. I'm just going to copy everything that's on this line over here, and then I'm going to take away quantity, and then just put the rate. So this rate is going to be a formula, which is going to be equal sum product of the quantity and the rate. Okay, so this is an Excel thing, right? So I'm just doing a sum product. That way it will calculate what that multiplication would be, assuming that I don't have that total. And then I'm just going to add a negative sign to that. So it would be the negative of that. So adding that line in there will now negate that. I want to make sure that this one doesn't have a class and a customer job in here. I'm going to clear out this billable column here for a second. So I'm going to have this line basically negate that one. I'm going to come down here and do the same thing. I'm going to copy everything over, and I'll delete the quantity, and I delete the customer job, and delete the rate and the class, and do the same thing. Do sum product, and then grab the two sets, and then add a negative sign to that, or I can also multiply it times -1. Again, it's your choice whether you want to do it on the spreadsheet prior to the import, or if you want to do it manually in QuickBooks after you import it. So same thing here. Again, we delete the class, delete the customer job, delete the quantity, and do the sum product formula. Okay, and times -1, and then the last one in here equals sum product. It's just one line in this particular case, but it's worth doing regardless. Okay, so we kind of are consistent here, and that's going to be, let me just make sure we're doing, again, sum product, G25 and H25. Yeah, perfect, 4,000. And then that will add a negative sign at the beginning, and that's good to go. So now this spreadsheet is now ready to import a zero net check with that adjustment at the end. Let's give it a shot. I'm going to go to Process IAF File. I click Yes. I'll override the one I already have in the desktop. And I'm going to now come back into QuickBooks, go to File, Utilities, Import IAF File, bring that over. Okay, and again, it could be a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes, depending how many transactions it is. We'll wait for that to be completed, and then we'll run the report to see what that looks like. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go to Reports, Company, Profit and Loss Standard, this fiscal year, and do my customer job. I got my direct labor in there. If I double click on any of these and open up the check, I just want to make sure that these checks are being zeroed out. Okay, so there was an error in here, and I know exactly what happened. That was my fault. The quantity needed to have a 1. That was my mistake. That's why that happened. Let me go ahead and delete them. Good. I think good thing that it happened, because these templates are not perfect, and that could cause the issue. So we'll just delete that. So I no longer have the direct labor in here. Let's come back in here and just do 1. I'm putting a quantity of 1. I think that should work. Let's do Process IAF File. Yes. Save that into the desktop. We can overwrite that. Go back into QuickBooks, File, Utilities, Import IAF. Import, select the file, and let's see what happens. That wasn't on purpose. I forgot to put the 1. It does happen. It is how it is done. It does require that 1 to know that that is going to be an amount that's going to be entered. So let's take a look at that one more time. Reports, Company Financial, Profit and Loss by job. And now you get to see direct labor in there. Let's double click to make sure it is truly a zero net check. And woof, yeah, this time it did it. Perfect. So yeah, it was that 1 that was missing. Something else I'd like to add is if you don't add the negative sign to here, and I'll just remove that here for a minute, and you decide to do this one as a -1, that will work as well. So as long as you got a quantity where there's a +1 or a -1, that will work. You just need to choose where that negative is going to go. Okay, let's do one more thing here, which I told you earlier that we were going to do, is instead of doing 1 per vendor, we're just going to do 1 generic vendor and have all the entries all in one shot. So let me delete them again. Okay, so now they're all deleted. Okay, we're going to go back to see. There's no, with the profit and loss by customer, there's no direct labor yet. Let's go back into our template here. And I'm going to delete these interjecting negatives I created, just to show you how that will work. Okay, and then here where it says payee, I'm just going to put payroll allocation. Okay, and I'm going to copy and paste that down, and I'm going to make sure that QuickBooks has a vendor called payroll allocation. So sort of the same way that I have it here. So payroll allocation, I'm going to quick add that as a vendor. Okay, so that's there. So now I know for sure that I got payroll allocation as a vendor, and that's what I'm going to bring in here. And then on where I used to have the customers, the employee names, instead of having them in payee, I'm going to put them in memo. So let's say, for example, I don't care about the dates, and I just want to put the employee name in there instead of having the date in there. That could be arranged. So let me open up my Excel that has all this data, and then I'm going to bring in the employee names only. And again, I'm sort of ignoring not that one, this one. I'm ignoring the dates, and I'm just putting the employee names instead. Now, it is also possible for you to concatenate the employee name and the date together. That could be done too. So if you want to do that, I'll show you how to do that real quick. You do concat, then we do this, comma, and then we do quote space quote. That's just insert a space, comma, and then bring the date. So I could do this where I concatenate it. Now I do have an issue that date show up as a number. So we'll have to do all sorts of other things to get the actual date in there, but it gives you a general idea. You can use the concat to do that. Okay, so if you were to do something like that, and again, you would have to do additional formulas to convert that date into text. And I'll show you real quick how to do that. Just how to do that. So you would go to text, and we'll select this, and we'll do mm/dd/YYY and end quote. I think that will do it. Let's see. Should do it. Or there needs to be a comma between the value and the format. So that's what it looks like. Press enter. So now I get it's called text version of it. So I'll bring it here, and then on the concat, instead of referring to the original date, I will refer to this one, and then that will work here. So if I wanted to bring the employee name and the date concatenated, again, this is an Excel thing. I would then, let's just copy that, come over to my template, and then paste that instead in here. So again, depending on what you want to bring in into the memo, that's just the example that we're doing. Now, these are all going to be check number 1, because it's just going to be one check. Again, just one check, not broken down by vendor. And then at the very end, I'll do the same thing I did, where I create that 0 line, delete that. Here will be quantity -1. Here will be sum product of all of these and all of these. Okay, no class, no here. That should do it. Let's do process IIF, big blue button on the right hand side. We'll click on process IIF, click yes, export that, yes. Go back into QuickBooks. Again, there's no labor allocation here. I'm going to import this one in here. Again, this is not requiring it brought down by employee or by vendor. Just one big check that's going to allocate everything. It's also possible too. So that's kind of like the way a journal entry would work. A journal entry would just be one big journal entry. So we're kind of emulating that instead of having it broken down by vendor. So let's go back and do reports and do company financial and do profit and loss by job. Yes, we get successfully. Do the direct labor allocation. If I double click on any of these, I can expand here, click expand rows. I can see in the memo the employee name, but I cannot break this down by vendor because it's just not broken down by vendor. If you remember earlier, we had broken them down by vendor, and we can see them group by the employee because we had the employee as a vendor. In this case, because I did just one big check, I can only see that information in the memo. So you can see here, this is just one big check that contains all the information and is going into payroll allocation. That's it. That's a big, long video that explains in concept how zero net checks, how labor and class allocation works. If you like this and you need this and you have a spreadsheet that looks like the one that I have, you can just buy my template. I'll put the link in the description. I will save you tons of hours of time. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.